I was sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, staring at the mountains like I always do when I saw it. A crisp white envelope with a logo that made my heart skip a beat. Karen's logo, of course. The self-proclaimed HOA queen, clipboard in one hand, gavel in the other, ready to judge the world. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, like she had meant to send it to one of her poor neighbors who actually lived under her HOA's grasp. But no, the envelope was addressed to me, in my handwriting style that I swear she's probably memorized from all the neighborhood notices she posts in her obsessive little Facebook HOA group. I tore it open and there it was. Her words, all official-looking, typed in that overbearing font she loves. You are in violation of HOA covenants. Immediate compliance is required. Failure to adhere may result in fines, legal action, or other measures deemed necessary by the HOA board. I nearly spit out my coffee. Now let me clarify something. My mountain ranch is officially, legally, absolutely, completely outside Karen's HOA. I double-checked my property maps when I bought it. I even had the surveyor confirm it. There's not a single clause, rule, or magical HOA wand that could touch my property. Not that Karen would care. Because Karen doesn't need facts, she operates on pure imagination and rage. Curiosity mixed with amusement as I dialed her number. I should have known better. Within 3 rings, she answered like a drill sergeant on a caffeine overdose. I know what you're doing and you will stop it immediately, she barked. I tried to calm her down, carefully explaining, Karen, I'm technically outside your jurisdiction. This letter. She cut me off mid-sentence. Jurisdiction, don't give me legal excuses, you cannot ignore the rules. I blinked. She had apparently invented a rule where one's property being outside the HOA was irrelevant. Clearly, she had read the maps upside down, or maybe she didn't read them at all. Her voice escalated. She was waving her phone around, I imagined, her HOA army behind her. You'll be fined, the board will meet and take action. You think mountains protect you? Think again. I had to stifle a laugh. Mountains are sturdy, much sturdier than Karen's logic. Still, I felt that flicker of suspense every storyteller lives for, the what if she actually does something insane kind of suspense. And trust me, Karen does something insane. After about 10 minutes of yelling and me trying to be the calm, rational adult, which, by the way, never works with Karen, I hung up. My hands were shaking from both coffee and adrenaline, and I realized this wasn't just a fight over property. This was a full-blown Karen situation. Her letters had started small, but I knew from experience that her escalation scale was exponential. First, it's a friendly notice. Then it's the fines will ruin you. Finally, if she doesn't get her way, she goes full courtroom drama, complete with passive-aggressive neighbor witnesses and neighborhood gossip that spreads faster than wildfire. I walked around my ranch, letting my eyes scan the trees, the fence, my perfectly ordinary legal land. The sun was glinting off the mountain peaks, reminding me that no HOA, even a hyperactive one run by Karen, could touch this paradise. But I knew she wouldn't stop at logic. Logic doesn't scare Karen, facts don't scare Karen. What scares her is losing control, and I had just unknowingly stepped on her control territory button. So I made a mental note, document everything. Take photos, keep the letters, record any phone calls, and maybe, just maybe, enjoy the show, because if Karen escalated, it was going to be pure entertainment. Little did I know this letter was just the beginning. She was about to embark on a mission to bend reality, reinterpret maps, and perhaps even try to invent rules that don't exist, all just to control my life from her tiny HOA kingdom miles away. And the suspense, oh, the suspense. The question wasn't whether Karen would try something ridiculous, it was what, exactly what. And when she did, I had a feeling my mountain ranch, my peaceful escape, was about to become the stage for the most absurd HOA showdown I'd ever experienced. I took a deep breath, sipped my coffee, and whispered to the mountains, "Bring it on, Karen, bring it on." And that's when my phone rang again. When my phone rang again, I knew instantly it was Karen. My instincts weren't wrong. That ringtone, the one I'd secretly set just for her, sounded like a war drum. I sighed, bracing myself. "Hello," I said cautiously. "You will comply with the HOA rules," she shouted before I even had a chance to breathe. I couldn't help it, I chuckled nervously. "Karen, I already told you I'm outside your jurisdiction. My ranch isn't part of the HOA. She paused for a split second. I thought maybe reason had finally seeped in. Ha, foolish. "No, you think the mountains protect you? Think again." Her voice escalated into what I can only describe as a combination of a banshee and a marching band. You are under notice, the board will act and the fines, oh the fines will ruin you. I pinched the bridge of my nose. I tried the calm, diplomatic approach. Karen, I'm outside the HOA. Literally, I'm 20 miles beyond your borders. Maps, legal property maps, confirm this. Oh, maps, she shrieked. Maps are for fools. The HOA sees beyond maps. We enforce morality, decorum, and there it was, her big mistake. She just admitted she makes rules up as she goes. I couldn't help smiling. Morality and decorum? Karen, I live in the mountains. The only morality here is whether my dog steals the neighbor's socks. She didn't laugh, she actually yelled louder. Do not mock me, you will regret this, the board. I cut her off, barely able to contain my amusement. Karen, there is no board here. You can't have meetings outside the HOA territory. There's literally nothing you can do. I've checked every clause, every rule, every imaginary regulation you love to cite. I swear I heard a faint hissing sound on the line. I imagined her looking at her clipboard, flipping pages, muttering, "It can't be the rules say." Then she dropped the bomb. If you do not comply, I will escalate this to legal action. Now I have to pause here. Escalate legal action? Against someone outside the HOA? I almost laughed so hard my coffee went up my nose, but I stayed calm because sometimes the best weapon against a Karen is measured patience. So let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice steady. You are threatening me with fines and legal action for a property that isn't even under your HOA's authority. Yes, she screamed, you will pay, you will. I held up a hand to imagine stopping her. Karen, take a deep breath. I'm not part of your HOA. Your board has no power here. If you pursue legal action, it won't just fail, it will make you look insane. Your own neighbors will see it, and trust me, they're already laughing behind your back. There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears grinding, the frantic map flipping, the desperate attempts to find some loophole that didn't exist. And then she did what I knew she would. She threatened to call, well, everyone. I will call your neighbors, the police, the newspapers. You will not get away with this. I laughed out loud because now we'd entered the full Karen meltdown. Please, I said, trying not to sound smug, call away. I'll show the cops the property lines, I'll show the newspapers the maps, and I'll let the neighbors know the truth. My ranch is legal and your rules don't apply. She huffed, you think you're clever. Not clever, I replied, just legally correct, that's a big difference. And then, just when I thought the call might end, she made a move that would set the stage for the next round of absurdity. I'm coming up there myself to enforce the rules. I froze, my first thought, she's actually going to drive 20 miles into the mountains to yell at me. My second thought, oh, this is going to be entertaining. Because Karen, the woman who believes a clipboard is a weapon of ultimate authority, was about to step onto property she had absolutely zero control over. And I, for one, was not going to stop her. I ended the call, shaking my head and laughing nervously. The mountains were quiet again, but I knew this was only the beginning. Karen didn't give up easily, she never gives up. And somewhere deep down, I felt a thrill of suspense. The next chapter in this ridiculous showdown was coming, and I had no idea just how far she would go. Little did I know, by the time she actually showed up, things would escalate in ways that even my imagination couldn't predict. I had barely hung up from the latest Karen meltdown when I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. My heart skipped a beat, not in fear, but in sheer disbelief. There she was, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, driving up my mountain road like she owned it. I stepped onto the porch, trying to suppress a laugh. There she was in all her glory, a pink blazer that looked like it could be seen from space, sunglasses reflecting the entire forest behind her, and a clipboard clutched in one hand like a battle standard. She rolled down the window before I could even say hello. I'm here to enforce the rules, she shouted. I waved casually. Hi Karen, welcome to my ranch. Funny thing, this ranch is technically outside the HOA's jurisdiction, so rules don't apply here. Her face went from confident fury to a kind of cognitive meltdown in about 3 seconds. I swear I saw smoke coming out of her ears, though that could have just been my imagination or the altitude. You what? She screamed. This land, this mountain, it's within my moral authority. I had to laugh. Morality? Right, that's Karen's secret weapon, enforcing moral outrage as if it were a law. I stepped closer to the fence, letting the full drama of the mountains surround us. Karen, let me show you something. I pulled out the property survey map I'd printed weeks ago and held it up for her to see. The lines were clear. The HOA's borders ended miles before my property began. See this red line? That's where your HOA power stops and my ranch begins. Congratulations, you've officially overstepped. She squinted at the map like it was written in some alien language. Her lips trembled. I don't, this map can't be right. I smiled. It is. You can check with the county office, the courthouse, Google Earth, pick your favorite method, or you can just scream at the mountains, your choice. Karen looked like she was about to faint. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. Then she did what I should have expected. She started yelling at my neighbors. Not ones who lived nearby, mind you, they were all outside the HOA too, but the few hikers and tourists who had wandered onto the trail near my property. Everyone, this property is under HOA violation, you will see, she shouted. A squirrel ran past, startled, and I swear even the mountains groaned. I kept my cool, taking a deep breath. Karen was a tornado of chaos, but I had the advantage, facts, law, and a mountain on my side. I decided to let her rage simmer while I planned the next move. Inside my ranch house, I made notes. Pictures of her car on my driveway, her shouting at imaginary rules, and the videos I'd secretly recorded on my porch. Everything was evidence not for revenge, but just in case this got even crazier. Which, knowing Karen, it would. The suspense was killing me, but in a weird way, it was also thrilling. Every HOA story I'd ever heard ended at a petty argument over grass height or mailbox color. This was different. This was epic. Karen eventually stomped off my porch and started packing like a caged lion, clipboard in hand, muttering about fines, morality, and mountain justice. I decided it was time to test the limits of her imagination. Karen, I called out, did you bring your legal team with you? She spun around, eyes wide. I don't need a legal team, I have the board and the power of HOA law. I laughed. The board doesn't govern this property, and HOA law stops right over there, I said, pointing to the property line. You're literally outside your authority, your whole tirade is, let's call it, enthusiastic fiction. Karen froze. I could see the wheels spinning in her head. And then, in a move that still makes me shake my head in disbelief, she started waving her arms like a conductor trying to summon an orchestra of rules that didn't exist. You think this is over? I wills. And then she tripped, not on purpose, not dramatically, just tripped over her own shoes. She sprawled on the gravel like a flamingo caught in a hurricane, clutching her clipboard for dear life. I had to bite my tongue to stop laughing. The suspense of what she'd do next hung thick in the mountain air. I knew this was only the beginning. Karen would not go quietly. Oh no, she would escalate. And when she did, I had a feeling the next round would be even more ridiculous. I walked back into my house, shaking my head, sipping my coffee, and muttering to myself, if this is the battle, I can't wait to see the war. And somewhere in the distance, I swear the mountains seemed to chuckle with me. After the pink blazer disaster on my driveway, I realized something important. Karen wasn't going to stop. Not until she had exhausted every ounce of imagination and authority she thought she possessed. And trust me, that woman has a limitless supply of both. So I decided it was time to stop reacting and start planning. Not in some vengeful, let's get her back way, but in a smart, calculated way. Because when Karen escalates, you don't fight fire with fire. You fight fire with property maps, laws, and a little bit of patience. First, I gathered all the evidence. Pictures of Karen screaming at the mountains, videos of her packing on my driveway like she was auditioning for a reality TV show, and even audio recordings of her claiming fines she had absolutely no right to issue. I had enough to make a case for a comedy show, honestly, but I kept it strictly for protection, just in case she tried to spin this into something insane. Next, I dug into the HOA rules. Every document I could find online, every county record, every tiny clause that might come in handy. And sure enough, my property line was crystal clear. My ranch was well outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Karen's threats were baseless. Legally, she was a storm in a teacup. But baseless threats aren't always harmless. The suspense wasn't about whether she could stop me, it was about what crazy thing she would try next. I decided to send her a friendly letter. Friendly in tone, firm in facts, and spiked with a little humor because why not? The letter said, Dear Karen, it has come to my attention that you believe the HOA rules extend to my property. I have verified through legal surveys and county records that my ranch is outside the HOA jurisdiction. Therefore, your threats of fines and legal action have no standing. Please cease all attempts to enforce rules on my property. Thank you for your attention. Sincerely, me. I mailed it with a sense of suspense, knowing full well that Karen would either ignore it, melt down, or attempt some ridiculously over-the-top action. And of course, as expected, the reaction was immediate. The next morning my phone rang again. I knew who it was before I answered. Karen. "You think you can ignore me?" she shrieked. "You cannot hide from the HOA, I will." I held up a hand, grinning. "Karen, slow down, read the letter, read it slowly. The part about outside the HOA jurisdiction, that's your cue." She sputtered. I could hear her muttering, "No, no, this is wrong, the surveyor must be mistaken." I decided to escalate the suspense a little more. "Karen, I've also included copies for your neighbors and the county office, so everyone knows you don't have jurisdiction here." There was a pause, a long, tense pause, and then the shrieking started again. I swear she was inventing new words at this point. This is a scandal. I will enforce the rules anyway." It was almost impressive, the sheer determination she had. But the suspense wasn't just in her shouting, it was in waiting to see what absurd, creative method she would try next. Would she call the police again, threaten imaginary fines, perhaps stage a board meeting on my driveway? With Karen, anything was possible. So I decided to play along, but subtly. I started documenting every move, every phone call, every email, every attempt to overreach. I kept the suspense high, not just for myself, but for the inevitable showdown. And I have to admit, it was a little fun. There's something thrilling about outsmarting someone who believes themselves unstoppable. The mountains were quiet around me, but inside, the tension was electric. Karen was flailing, and I was calm, collected, and fully armed with facts. By the end of the day, I had a sense of satisfaction and anticipation, because Karen wouldn't just give up. She never does. The suspense wasn't whether she would escalate, it was how. And when she did, I needed to be ready. So I poured a glass of wine, sat on my porch, and watched the sun set behind the mountains, imagining Karen storming up my driveway with another dramatic declaration. And somewhere deep down, I knew the next chapter would be even more ridiculous and even more satisfying to watch unfold. Little did I know, the next confrontation would push her limits, and mine, in ways that made the first few calls look like a polite disagreement over garden fences. By now, I had accepted a simple truth: Karen never backs down. Ever, not for reason, not for law, not even for common sense. And if the previous calls and driveway theatrics were any indication, she was about to go full maximum overdrive. It started innocently enough, or at least as innocent as anything involving Karen can be. I was enjoying a quiet morning on my porch, sipping coffee, when I saw her car turning onto my driveway again. I swear I didn't even need binoculars to see the fury radiating from that pink blazer like a neon sign. And then she stepped out, clipboard waving like a weapon, her voice carrying across the mountains. "I will not be ignored." I took a deep breath. This was it, the next level. My neighbors, if they weren't already used to her antics, would probably call the fire department thinking the apocalypse had arrived. She stormed up to the porch, pointing at me like she was a general giving orders to an army of one. "You will comply with HOA rules immediately. The board is watching. The police are watching. The mountains are watching." Mountains, watching, I almost choked on my coffee. At this point, her imagination had completely detached from reality. I tried to reason. "Karen, the board has no authority here. The police won't enforce HOA rules outside their jurisdiction, and the mountains, well, the mountains aren't sentient." Her eyes narrowed. "You mock me," she yelled. "This will not stand, I will." And then she did something I'll never forget. She started taking notes on my property like she was preparing an official report for the United Nations. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or film it for evidence, so I did both. Every time I thought she was done, she found a new outrage. A crooked fence post, violation, my mailbox leaning slightly to the left, catastrophe, that pile of firewood I hadn't stacked perfectly straight, criminal. The suspense wasn't just in what she would do, it was in how far she would go before reality intervened. Because I knew the law was on my side, but Karen's energy, oh, her energy was something else entirely. She began packing like a caged tiger, muttering about fines, morality, and imaginary board meetings. At one point, I saw her pull out her phone and start typing furiously. Was she sending emails to neighbors, threatening local authorities, or perhaps consulting some secret Karen HOA manual that no one else had access to? The suspense made my pulse quicken. Then came the classic Karen tactic, escalation through intimidation. She leaned over my fence and yelled to a passerby, "Do you see this violation? You must report it. The HOA demands compliance." The passerby, a young hiker with a backpack, stared like he had stumbled into a live comedy sketch. He nodded politely, murmured something about cool views, and walked away. Karen fumed. I realized I needed to stay calm. Panic would only feed her theatrics, so I poured myself another coffee, leaned back in my chair, and let the absurdity unfold. Watching her scramble was like watching a storm hit the mountains, chaotic, loud, but ultimately harmless if you stayed grounded. Hours passed. Karen's shrieks escalated, then plateaued, then restarted with new intensity. She began waving the clipboard wildly, throwing in words like fines, legal action, and morality enforcement like confetti at a parade. My neighbors, who had been watching discreetly from a distance, were now recording the spectacle on their phones. Finally, she paused for a moment, breathing heavily, and glared at me like she was about to unleash the ultimate HOA judgment. I braced myself, knowing that whatever came next would probably be completely absurd and completely harmless, but potentially embarrassing. And then she made the mistake of her life. She leaned too far over the fence, lost her balance, and toppled sideways, clipboard, sunglasses, and all, right onto the gravel. I couldn't hold it in. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off my chair. Karen scrambled to her feet, clutching her clipboard like it was a lifeline, muttering, "This is not over, I will." But by now, the suspense had shifted. It was no longer about whether she could enforce her rules. It was about how she would recover from her own meltdown, and honestly, I was beginning to enjoy watching her unravel. I walked inside my house, still laughing, and made myself a note: document everything, stay calm, and prepare for the next escalation. Karen had reached maximum overdrive today, but I knew this story wasn't over. Oh no, the mountains, the maps, and her imagination had only just begun to collide. Little did I know, the next chapter would reveal just how desperate she could get, and just how satisfying the eventual victory would be. By the next morning, I thought I'd seen it all. Pink blazer, clipboard theatrics, driveway drama. Karen had pulled out every trick in her imaginary HOA handbook, but nothing prepared me for the look on her face when reality finally hit. It started innocently enough. I was sipping my coffee, reviewing my notes and the dozens of photos I'd taken over the past few days. The mountain air was crisp, the sun hitting the peaks just right. Peaceful, too peaceful maybe, because suddenly I heard a car turning up the driveway again. Karen, of course. She stepped out of her car like a general storming the battlefield. Clipboard held high, sunglasses reflecting the entire valley, her voice already echoing across the trees. "I will not be ignored." I raised a hand in greeting. "Good morning, Karen. How's the crusade today?" Her face froze, not in rage this time, not in disbelief. No, this was the moment where she realized she had overreached. I swear I could see the gears grinding in her brain, smoke practically rising from her temples. This can't be right," she stammered. "Oh, what's wrong?" I asked, letting a small, smug smile slip onto my face. "Did you check the map again?" Her lips trembled. "The property line, it's outside." Bingo, that's when the suspense shifted. Karen wasn't just angry, she was flabbergasted, panicked, and desperately trying to rewrite reality in her head. She had spent days, maybe weeks, preparing her mental war plan, and now, poof, it didn't exist. "Yes," I said calmly, pointing to the county survey map I had taped to my porch door the previous day. "My ranch is outside the HOA jurisdiction. Your rules don't apply here. Not a single one. Legally, morally, geographically, none of it." She grabbed her clipboard like a lifeline, flipping through papers with more force than necessary. The board, the meetings." I shook my head. "There's no board here, you can't call meetings, you can't fine me, you can't enforce anything on this property. All that yelling and threatening, it's just noise." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She tried to sputter something about fines, morality, or the HOA code, but the words sounded meaningless even to her. I could see it, the moment of absolute realization. She had built a mountain of rules in her head, all designed to control me, and the foundation was gone. I felt a strange mix of sympathy and triumph. This wasn't just about winning a battle, it was about watching someone's illusion of power collapse, and Karen's illusion was spectacular. Then came the comedic part. She began packing, muttering to herself, waving her hands in the air, and occasionally glaring at the trees like they had betrayed her. I followed the rules, I did everything right, it should have worked. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I laughed, a full, loud, mountain-filling laugh. "Karen, sometimes the mountains don't care about HOA rules, the law doesn't care either, you just have to accept it." She froze mid-gesture, staring at me like I'd grown another head. Then in a voice that was barely above a whisper, she said, but I tried so hard." "Yes," I said gently, almost soothingly, "and that's why it's so entertaining." Now the suspense wasn't about whether she could stop me, she couldn't. It was about what she would do next. Would she storm off in defeat, try to invent another imaginary rule, or maybe call the entire neighborhood to protest. The possibilities were endless and hilarious. I stepped closer, keeping my tone calm. Karen, this is your chance. Take a deep breath, accept the reality, walk away before this gets messier. She blinked, stuttered, looked at the clipboard, looked at the mountains, and then she did something I hadn't expected. She quietly muttered something about checking the boundaries again, turned around, and stormed back to her car. Victory, sweet, quiet, suspenseful victory. The mountains were still, the air was calm. And Karen, well, she was probably plotting her next imaginary power grab somewhere along the way down. I leaned against the porch railing, sipped my coffee, and let the tension drain away. The suspense of the past days had finally shifted into relief, but I knew better than to celebrate fully. Karen never disappears completely, she just hibernates until the next perceived injustice. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that the next encounter, when it came, would be equally ridiculous, equally tense, and equally satisfying. But for now, I could just enjoy the mountains, the ranch, and the knowledge that no HOA, even Karen, could touch me. After that quiet retreat, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally accepted reality. I even let myself relax for a full 24 hours. I mowed the lawn, stacked firewood, and enjoyed the mountains in peace. But of course, that peace was an illusion. Karen doesn't just accept defeat, she escalates always. It started with the calls, at first 1 or 2 a day, then 5, then 10, every time the same shrill threats, the same over-the-top claims, the same ridiculous insistence that she had some sort of legal authority over my ranch. I stopped answering, letting the voicemail messages build into a surreal audio diary of her obsession. Then she appeared again. I was on the porch, coffee in hand, listening to the wind whistle through the pines, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, the dreaded sound of Karen on a mission. I didn't need to look, I knew it was her. Pink blazer, clipboard, shades, aura of chaos. And this time she had brought reinforcements. From somewhere she had convinced 2 of her neighbors to follow her. Both were carrying clipboards too, clearly bought for maximum intimidation. They parked haphazardly along the driveway and marched up like an HOA mini-army. "You will see," Karen shouted, flinging her arms wide. "The rules will be enforced, compliance is mandatory." I leaned against the porch railing, trying to keep calm while secretly thinking, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. They started inspecting the property like it was a crime scene. One neighbor was measuring the fence with a tape measure, muttering about aesthetic violations, while Karen stomped around, gesturing at my firewood, my mailbox, and even my dog, who was now giving her a very unimpressed look. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward. "You do realize none of this applies to my ranch, correct?" Karen froze as if I had just cast a spell. Her eyes darted to her clipboard, then to the neighbors, then to me. You can't be serious," she hissed. "Oh, I'm serious," I said calmly, showing her the official survey map. "My property is outside the HOA jurisdiction. Anything you attempt here has no legal standing. None, zilch, nada." The neighbors squinted at the map, then at each other, realizing they had been dragged into Karen's fantasy war. Karen, however, refused to back down. The rules apply morally," she shouted. I could only shake my head. Morality isn't enforceable, Karen, maps are. Now the suspense wasn't about whether I could stop her, the law was on my side, but how she would respond when all her schemes collapsed simultaneously. She flailed, packing back and forth, muttering about fines, reports, and the board's oversight. At one point, she tried to call the county office, presumably to confirm her imagined authority. I grabbed my phone first. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm, "you might want to sit down or read a book or just breathe, because this isn't going to end the way you think." And that's when it happened, the final meltdowns. Karen shrieked, slammed her clipboard to the ground, and kicked the tape measure into a bush. "This is unacceptable." The neighbors froze. I couldn't help but chuckle. She had finally realized that her power had limits, and the suspense shifted from her actions to her internal collapse. Watching someone come face to face with the fact that their control over the world was an illusion is oddly satisfying. I stepped closer, smiling, letting the tension build just a little more. "Karen, you've given this everything, your energy, your time, your imagination, but it's over. You can't enforce anything here. Your rules end at the red line on the map, that's reality. The mountains don't lie, the law doesn't lie, and neither do I." She stared at me, lips trembling, eyes wide, and for a moment I thought she might actually faint. Then, in a surprisingly low voice, she muttered, This isn't over." I laughed softly. Karen, it really is. Now please take your neighbors and your clipboard and go home. There's nothing else to see here. And with that, she stomped back to her car, muttering about mountain injustice, and next time I'll be ready. Her neighbors trailed behind her like defeated soldiers, carrying the last shred of credibility she had brought with her. I leaned back on the porch, letting the adrenaline drain, sipping my coffee. The suspense was finally resolving, not in chaos, but in victory. The HOA had tried, Karen had tried, and the mountains, they had won. Little did I know, the final chapter, the aftermath, would be just as satisfying, with Karen's reputation among the neighborhood fully cemented in legend for all the wrong reasons. The morning after Karen's final meltdown, I woke up to the crisp mountain air, birds singing, and an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like a week, my ranch was quiet, truly quiet. No screeching about fines, no imaginary board meetings, no pink blazer waving like a battle flag. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, scanning the mountains for any signs of chaos. Nothing, just the wind, the trees, and the faint scent of pine. Victory had never smelled so sweet. Of course, I knew better than to think it was permanent. Karen doesn't just disappear, she hibernates, plots, and finds new ways to assert authority. But for now, the suspense had shifted from fear of her to enjoyment of her defeat. And what a defeat it was. The neighbors, those she had dragged along on her crusade, started trickling back to my property, but this time they weren't here to enforce imaginary rules. They were here to apologize, sort of. One of them, the tape measure guy, shuffled up the driveway. Sorry about yesterday, didn't realize, yeah. He looked embarrassed, glancing at Karen's empty car parked down the road. I smiled and waved him off. It's fine, she means well in a terrifying sort of way. The other neighbor mumbled something about not signing up for this and practically ran back to her own property. I shook my head, laughing quietly. Karen's meltdown had left a trail of mild confusion and a ton of entertainment. But the real satisfaction came later when I checked my mailbox. There it was, a letter from the HOA, and it wasn't from Karen. It was from the actual board, politely confirming that my property was not under their jurisdiction. I nearly choked on my coffee. Finally, official recognition that I had won not just in practice but on paper. The suspense of potential fines, threats, and legal action was officially over. I put the letter on my counter and took a deep breath, realizing just how absurd the last week had been. Karen had tried everything: calls, visits, threats, imaginary fines, neighborhood intimidation, but the law and geography had my back. Mountains and maps had triumphed over a clipboard and delusions of power. And then, like the cherry on top of this HOA saga, I received a text from one of my amused neighbors. Karen's organizing a support group for people whose authority doesn't exist outside their HOA. Thought you'd want to know. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The suspense wasn't just in the battle, it was in the aftermath, the ripple effect of absurdity she left behind. Even outside the mountains, her legend would grow. Not as an enforcer of rules, but as the woman who tried to control reality and failed spectacularly. I spent the day walking my property, checking the fence posts, the firewood, the mailbox. Everything was untouched, everything perfectly legal, everything mine. Peace had returned. The mountains were calm, my ranch was mine, and for the first time in days, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt since the first letter arrived. Of course, Karen may return someday, clipboard in hand, ready for round 2, but for now I was victorious. The suspense, the drama, the humor, it had all led to this satisfying conclusion. I poured myself another coffee, sat back on the porch, and looked at the mountains. I whispered to no one in particular, sorry, Karen. The rules stop here. The mountains and the law are on my side. The wind carried my words across the valley, and I imagined Karen somewhere down below, muttering to herself, plotting, packing, imagining new imaginary rules. And I smiled because this time the suspense was mine to enjoy. Victory in the mountains doesn't always come quietly. Sometimes it comes with pink blazers, clipboards, and endless shrieking. But when it comes, it's glorious, satisfying, and hilarious. And this victory, perfect in every way. As the sun set behind the peaks, I raised my coffee in a toast to freedom, to mountains, and to surviving the most dramatic HOA showdown in history. Karen may have lost, but the story, that would live on forever. And somewhere in the distance, I swear the mountains seem to laugh along with me. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.